Everyone, welcome back to Katie's Favorite Recipes. Today I've got 3 great easy weeknight meals that I think you all are going to love. The first one is a one-pot meal and it's sausage, pepper, and pasta. It was super good. It's one of our favorites now. The second one is pork chops with gravy and I served that over mashed potatoes and I'm going to cook that in the crock pot, so it was really easy. And then the last one is pepper jack chicken and we're just going to bake that in the oven. These are all 3 super simple and I think you all are going to love them. So let's go ahead and get started with the sausage, pepper, and pasta now. Starting off with this smoked sausage and pepper pasta recipe, I've got 4 pounds of smoked sausage here and I'm just going to cut it up into coins. If you're new here and you don't know, I do like to make recipes most of the time that makes leftovers. I have a family of 4 and I feel like recipes with leftovers are so much easier because I do not have to cook every night. And we can also send it in lunches and things like that. If you don't want leftovers, you can just cut the portion sizes down on this, but this is what we're doing. So I've got a small onion here, and I'm just going to finely dice that with my chopper. I've got a small blade, and so that's what I'm going to use, and just finely dice up this whole onion. And then after I do that, I'm also going to do about a half of a green bell pepper. You can use whatever color and how much ever you want. Our favorite is the onion and stuff like this, so if you would rather have more peppers than onions or however you want to do that, you can go ahead and just add whatever you want to this and just make it your own recipe. But this was so good. My family loved this. My husband actually told me that this was probably one of his biggest favorites. It was really a big hit in our house. So I think you all will love this, but like I said, use whatever you want. And just make it your own. So once we finish chopping up our bell peppers and our onions, and as you can see, they are pretty small little sizes. If you want yours a little bigger, go ahead and make them bigger. We are going to start sauteing in butter our smoked skinless sausage. So I just melted down a couple tablespoons of butter in the skillet, and then I'm going to start putting a little bit of char on my sausage. If you don't want to do that, you can throw everything in at one time except for the pasta and bring it all to a boil and then add the pasta and let it cook. But I just wanted to get those flavors blended in and everything like that. So I'm going to saute my smoked sausage, and then next I will go ahead and add in my peppers and things like that and saute those. But we're going to keep sauteing these peppers and make sure that they all get a good char on them. I am going to add in 2 teaspoons of minced garlic. I probably should have done that first, but I actually kind of forgot to add it in. So I'm just going to make a little hole and put that into my pan, and I'm going to let it get fragrant and flavorful, and then I'll just stir everything up and finish charring my smoked sausage. And it still worked out the same just as well. So now that it's gotten fragrant, I'm mixing everything up, and I'm just going to stir it around and let that blend together. And then next, I'm going to start adding in my peppers and my onions. But we're just going to keep working with this and getting everything added in so all the flavors can blend. I didn't add any more butter whenever I added my peppers and onions because I feel like I still had enough. But I went ahead and made a hole and added those in and let them start cooking before I stir everything up together. I just want to get these kind of charred and get them translucent so that I feel like it'll give the recipe more flavor whenever I do add in the pasta. So I'm just going to keep stirring this around over here on the corner, and then once it starts getting a little bit of char to it, I'm just going to mix it all up and let it cook together for a few minutes. I didn't do this very long, maybe about 5 or 10 minutes. So basically this is a one pot recipe that I'm doing here. This recipe was really easy and it was minimal cleanup because I cooked everything in one pot, which I think made that really nice. I'm going to go over my peppers and my smoked sausage with the kind of seasonings that we like. So feel free to change this up or not do it at all if you don't like these seasonings. But I'm going to use salt and pepper, and then I'm also going to do some paprika. And I'm just doing this to taste. If you have smoked paprika, that would probably be really good in this recipe, but I didn't have smoked paprika. I had regular because I ran out and they didn't have it at the store. So I'm just using regular. But like I said, use whatever seasonings you want and go ahead and just go over everything a couple times with that. And we're just going to keep letting this simmer and cook until our peppers and onions are getting kind of translucent. But we're going to be just cooking and mixing this up to let all of the seasonings coat over everything really well. And then once we do that, we are going to start adding in our beef broth or chicken broth. I'm using beef broth just because I feel like it gives a stronger flavor than the chicken broth does. So I'm going to go in with 4 cups of beef broth, but we're going to pour that right into the skillet. Once we've poured in our beef broth or chicken broth, whatever you're using, I am going to let this come to a simmering boil before I add in my pasta. But I'm also going to go over top of this with some more seasonings. So I'm using the paprika again and the black pepper, but I'm not going to go over this with any more salt just because the smoked sausage has, flavors in it with salt, and then the broth has salt, so I don't want to overdo it on the salt. But we're going to stir this around and, like I said, let it come to a simmering boil. And then we are going to add in our Bowtie pasta, which this doesn't say bow tie on it, but it's the bow tie shape. So just look for that pasta shape, or you could use any other pasta that you want to do, but I just wanted to use these and I really did like them. But anyways, we're going to add those in there and make sure that we stir it all around, and we want to press all of this pasta below the water line to make sure that it can all cook, but some of it is going to stick out a little bit. It'll still start steaming and absorbing, and then you can just keep stirring this up and pressing it down and just kind of working it around. Just make sure you're stirring it and that you don't have your burner up too high, because if you do, it will just stick and burn at the bottom. But just take the lid off every little bit and just stir it around and work with it. And I also kind of just folded it in and twisted it that way that the bow tie pasta would flip and it wouldn't just move around and get all of the sides cooking. But once it's finished, we are going to start adding our Monterey Jack cheese. I did about 1.5 cups of that. If you have another kind of cheese that you want to use, feel free to do that, but I thought this was so good in this recipe. And I'm just going to add that in there and stir this around. If you wanted to add some heavy cream or something like that to this, you could do that as well to make it creamier and give it a little bit more of a richer flavor, but I just really liked it this way. I thought it was good as is, so I didn't add any heavy cream or anything like that. You could also maybe add a can of Rotel or something like that if you wanted to have some tomatoes in this, or even dice up some tomatoes and throw in this. But I just did the onions and the peppers, and I felt like that this was just so delicious. So once the cheese is melted, we're going to plate this up, and I topped mine with red pepper, and it was super good. For this next recipe, I'm making pork chops and gravy, and then I'm going to serve this over mashed potatoes. And this is kind of like beef tips or something, but it's like a pork chop version of it. It was super good. So I'm using 4 pork chops, and then I've got a can of cream of chicken soup, and then I did a packet of the onion dip mix. I'm also going to do 1 packet of pork gravy mix. And then I'm going to do a 1/2 cup of chicken broth. This was a little bit salty, but it was not overly salty when you mixed it with the mashed potatoes. So if you're worried about the salt, you can just do reduced sodium for the chicken broth. And then just don't add any extra salt. And that should cut it down. But anyways, we're going to mix this up with a whisk right in the crock pot. If you want to do it in a bowl, that's fine. But I'm just trying to keep down on the dishes. So I'm going to whisk this up, and then once I finish that, I'm just going to start adding in my pork chops. If my pork chops had have been thicker than what these were, I would have been able to make this last a little longer, but I just did a grocery pickup, and they gave me this pack of, pork chops that was this amount. So I didn't get to go in and pick them out. But anyways, I'm just going to start taking my pork chops and putting them in this gravy mixture, and just coating them with it really well on both sides. And then I'm actually going to take a spoon and I'm going to spoon this over top of my pork chops just to make sure that they're really coated in it. I didn't really add any extra seasonings to my pork chops just because this gravy mix was so flavorful that I didn't feel like it needed any more. And this recipe was so easy. It was super delicious. It didn't take too long to cook this in the crock pot. I did have mine on high, so it cooked pretty fast. But if you would rather cook it on low, that's fine too. But anyways, I'm just going to finish up taking this and spooning it on top of my pork chops. And then I'm going to cover this up and just let it cook. Once it's almost done, I'm going to go ahead and make my instant mashed potatoes and set those to the side. And I'm going to make my cornstarch slurry. So I'm going to do 1 teaspoon of cornstarch, and I'm just going to scoop out a couple spoonfuls of my gravy mixture into a separate cup, and I'm going to mix that up and whisk it up to make sure it's really smooth. And then I'm going to pour this back into my crock pot, and I'm going to cover this and just let it thicken for about 5 minutes maybe. And as you'll see, whenever I start stirring this cornstarch slurry into this, my pork chops are actually already starting to fall apart because they are so tender. And I'm going to go ahead and let it thicken, and then I'm going to shred them up once it's done and thick the way I want it. Now, if you want yours a little runnier, that's fine. You can leave it like that. But I just wanted mine a little bit thicker than what it was. So I'm going to let that thicken up just for a few minutes, and then once that's done and thick, I'm going to start shredding these. These are so soft that I just barely pushed with my whisk and they just fell apart, so I just shredded them like that. If you want to use 2 forks or however you want to do it, but just shred them up. And then once we do that, then we're just going to plate it up. I served mine over mashed potatoes and with a side of corn. So lastly, I'm making some pepper jack chicken, and I'm just baking this in the oven in my casserole dish. So I've got some nonstick spray, and I'm just going to spray that on it to help this keep from sticking and to make cleanup a whole lot easier. I've got about 1.5 pounds of chicken breast tenderloins here is what I'm using. If you want to use any other kind of chicken, feel free to do that. But I'm just going to start seasoning this to the way we like it. Feel free to use any seasonings you want. But I'm keeping it kind of simple and using salt. And then I'm going to do black pepper, onion powder, garlic powder, and I'm also going to go over this with paprika. If you have smoked paprika, that would be really good on this. Also, if you had something like Mrs. Dash or just any kind of seasoning that you and your family like with chicken would be good. Some rotisserie chicken seasoning would probably be good on this as well. But I'm just going to generously sprinkle this all over my chicken, and then I'm going to go through and flip all of my chicken over, and I'm going to go back over it with all the same stuff. We just want to make sure that we get this chicken good and coated on both sides. That way it'll be full of flavor. And once we finish that and we get our seasoning to the way we like it and get it all good and covered, we're going to start chopping up some onion. I just did a half of an onion and I diced that up with my chopper. I also am going to add mushrooms to this recipe after I finish dicing up my onion. I really like mushrooms, but not everybody in my house does. So I'm just going to add enough mushrooms for me. If there's anything else you want to add in this, you can. You could do some diced up jalapenos or bell peppers to add some more flavor. That would be pretty good. But once I finish doing that, I'm going to chop up about 2 to 4 tablespoons of butter and just cube them up into little squares. That way, whenever I put this in the oven, it's going to melt and seep throughout the whole thing. So we're just going to cover this with foil, but that really slowed the cooking process down, so I actually ended up taking the foil off. And I finished cooking this without it being covered, and it cooked a whole lot faster. And once it was finished, I put some pepper jack cheese on it, and then I put some Monterey jack cheese for the ones who didn't want pepper jack. And I stuck this back in the oven and melted it for maybe 5 minutes. And then once this was finished and the chicken was cooked all the way through, it was ready to eat. I did take this out a couple times and move the chicken around so that the onions could go down in that juice and cook, and that seemed to help too. But once this is finished and the cheese is melted, you're ready to eat it. I served mine with corn and spinach, and this was super good. We loved it. But again, thanks for watching, and I hope you all enjoy these easy weeknight meals.